Grandma loved you the most. From now on, she's your responsibility. Those were the last words my father said to me before abandoning his own mother at my front door. My name is Bethany. I am 29 years old living an independent life in Philadelphia. But that freezing winter evening completely shattered my reality. A luxury SUV pulled up abruptly to my driveway. My parents hauled a heavy wheelchair out of the trunk. My grandmother sat slumped in it, pale and struggling to catch her breath. Without even stepping inside, my father shoved the wheelchair onto the porch. He fired off rapid excuses about his demanding business schedule, declaring they could no longer handle her, and strictly ordered me to take over. Before I could ask about her current condition, my mother slammed the passenger door shut. The engine roared and the SUV sped off into the dark. They left absolutely nothing behind. No medical records, no emergency contacts, and not a single pill. I stood alone on the icy porch with a fragile old woman they had just thrown away like trash. 6 months passed. They never checked on her once. They had no idea that the night before she passed away, Grandma would press a small brass key into my palm and whisper, "After I'm gone, open the box." And they certainly had no idea that what I found inside would entirely destroy their arrogant lives. Welcome to Revenge Mode. Before we dive into the shocking truth hidden inside that wooden box, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us deliver more satisfying stories of betrayal and ultimate payback every single week. Now let's see what really happened. The next morning, while I was crushing my grandmother's blood pressure medication in the kitchen, the phone rang. I pressed the back of a heavy metal spoon against the small white pill inside a ceramic bowl. The pill snapped into a fine powder. My cell phone vibrated across the granite kitchen island. Katrina's name appeared on the screen. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, picked up the device, and answered the call, placing the phone on speaker. "Did you submit your emergency leave request to the department?" Katrina asked. "I sent it an hour ago," I replied. I poured exactly 2 ounces of warm water into the bowl. I stirred the powdered medication until it dissolved completely. "I requested a family leave of absence. I just need the manager to approve the paperwork by tomorrow morning." "I still cannot comprehend the situation," Katrina said. "Did your father even offer to pay for a professional caregiver? He runs a successful construction company. He certainly has the funds to hire a night nurse." "He left nothing," I stated, keeping my eyes on the bowl. "He left no instructions, no medical history files, and not a single dollar. They just left her wheelchair on the porch and drove away." Mentioning my parents sparked a sudden thought. Several months ago, I had spent an entire weekend installing a high-end security system at their house. My father wanted to monitor the perimeter, but I also placed a camera in the main living area at his specific request. He wanted to keep an eye on their new housekeeper. I walked over to the table and picked up my iPad. "Hold on a second, Katrina," I said. I tapped the security application icon. The screen loaded, spinning for a few seconds before dividing into grid views. I tapped the section labeled Main Living Room. The live feed buffered for a moment, then cleared into crisp, high-definition color. The room on the screen was entirely full. The large stone fireplace roared in the background, casting long shadows. 6 people stood around the custom oak coffee table. I recognized the guests immediately. They were members of the Gold Club, the exclusive country club my parents frequented. My father stood in the center of the room, holding a long-stemmed crystal glass filled with dark red wine. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, looking completely relaxed. My mother stood next to him in a dark cocktail dress, holding a silver tray of appetizers. She navigated through the group, offering the food to each person. I dragged my index finger across the screen to turn up the volume. The audio feed caught the ambient chatter in the room, the crackling of the fire and the sharp clinking of crystal glasses against the table. My father raised his glass in the air, drawing the immediate attention of his guests. He made direct eye contact with the group before speaking. "A toast," my father said. His voice carried clearly through the iPad speaker. "To a much-needed change of pace. No one has to revolve around a medical care schedule anymore." A man standing to his right let out a short laugh. He raised his own glass toward my father. You are finally free. It is about time. My mother stepped forward, offering the silver tray to the man. She shrugged her shoulders in a casual motion. Bethany volunteered for the hard part. She added without hesitation. Over the phone speaker, Katrina gasped loudly. Did they really just say that? She asked, her volume spiking. They dumped her on your porch last night and went home to drink wine with their friends. I did not answer, Katrina. I did not yell at the screen. I just stared at the smiling faces on the display. I watched my father take a long sip of his wine, laughing at another comment from his friend. I reached out and pressed the power button on the iPad. The screen went black, instantly cutting off the sound of their voices. I have to go, Katrina, I said quietly. I tapped the end call button on my phone. I picked up the bowl of dissolved medication and a separate bowl of warm porridge. I walked out of the kitchen, pushed the bedroom door open with my shoulder, and pulled a wooden chair right next to the bed. I sat down and focused entirely on lifting the spoon to my grandmother's mouth. 6 months passed. A massive snowstorm swept through the city of Philadelphia in the middle of December. The wind battered the exterior walls of the house, rattling the glass panes in the bedroom window. Snow piled up against the windowsill, blocking out the streetlights. Inside the room, the thermostat read 68 degrees. I sat in the wooden chair beside the bed, watching the rise and fall of the blanket. The digital clock on the nightstand displayed 2:15 in the morning. My grandmother lay flat on her back. Her breathing turned into rapid, shallow gasps. Each inhale produced a sharp, wheezing sound. Her chest jerked unevenly. I stood up from the chair and walked over to the dresser. I picked up my cell phone and pressed the power button. The screen illuminated the dark corner of the room. I opened the phone application, scrolled through the contact list, and pressed my father's name to report the medical emergency. I brought the speaker to my ear. The line connected. It rang exactly one time before a sharp click cut the tone off. The automated voicemail system started playing immediately. You have reached Paul. Please leave a message. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I did not wait for the beep. I did not leave a voice record. I tapped the red button ending the transmission. I placed the phone face down on the wooden surface of the dresser and walked back to the bed. My grandmother shifted on the mattress. The friction of the blankets rustled in the quiet room. Her eyelids fluttered and opened. She turned her head slowly, fixing her gaze on me. She lifted her right arm off the mattress. Her hand hovered in the air, her index finger curling inward, signaling me to come closer. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the edge of the bed. I positioned my head inches away from her face, waiting for her to speak. She did not say anything. Instead, she lowered her arm and brought her hand to the collar of her button-down flannel nightgown. Her fingertips hooked around the fabric. She pushed her fingers inside the neckline, reaching down toward her chest. She grabbed a thin silver chain hidden underneath her clothes. Using a sudden burst of physical strength, she pulled the chain upward. A small tarnished brass key emerged from under the collar. She gripped the key between her thumb and forefinger. She pulled hard, snapping the fragile silver clasp of the necklace. She extended her trembling arm toward me. I opened my right hand and held it flat over the mattress. She pressed her hand against mine and released her grip. The small brass key dropped into the center of my palm. I closed my fingers over the metal. It carried the warmth of her body temperature. She lowered her arm back down to her side. Her chest expanded as she pulled in a long, rattling breath. She swallowed, clearing her throat. "Bethany," my grandmother whispered. The sound barely rose above the noise of the wind hitting the window. "I am listening," I replied. "When they take my body away," she said, pausing to draw another breath. Her voice cracked, but the words remained clear. "Take this key, go to the rundown storage house, find the old leather suitcase, use this key to open the wooden box inside it." "I will open the box," I said. My grandmother held my gaze. Slowly, the tension left her facial muscles. Her eyelids drooped, covering her eyes halfway. Her head tilted to the right, resting heavily against the white pillowcase. Her chest rose one final time, pulling in a sharp intake of air. She released the breath in a long, continuous exhale. Her shoulders sank into the mattress. The wheezing sound stopped completely. Her chest stopped moving. I reached out and placed 2 fingers against the side of her neck right below her jawline, pressing lightly against her skin. I watched the second hand on my wristwatch sweep across the dial. I waited for a full 60 seconds. I felt no pulse against my fingertips. I moved my hand away and pulled the thick cotton blanket up to her shoulders, smoothing the fabric flat. I sat back down in the wooden chair, keeping my right hand closed tightly around the brass key. I looked at the window, watching the heavy snow continue to fall across Philadelphia. The next morning, exactly as the black hearse turned the corner and drove away from the snow-covered street, I started my car engine. I drove straight toward my grandmother's dilapidated storage house located on the edge of town. The tires crunched heavily over the unplowed snow. I parked directly in front of the peeling wooden door. I stepped out, retrieved a rusted key from my pocket, and unlocked the iron latch. I pushed the door open. The air inside felt colder than the outdoors. I walked past stacked cardboard boxes and covered furniture. In the far corner, partially hidden beneath a thick plastic tarp, sat a large vintage leather suitcase. I grabbed the worn handle and dragged the suitcase across the floor, pulling it into the center of the room. I pulled the stiff brass zippers apart, parting the heavy leather flaps. Inside, resting against the faded fabric lining, was a polished mahogany box. I lifted the box out. I set it down on a sturdy wooden crate. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small brass key. I slid the metal shaft into the keyhole and turned it clockwise. A sharp click echoed in the quiet storage room. I pushed the metal latch upward and opened the lid. The interior of the mahogany box was divided into multiple custom-built tiers. The top wooden tray held organized stacks of paper secured with thick rubber bands. I picked up the first stack. It consisted of several certificates of deposit. The next stack contained authentic United States Treasury bonds. Beneath those lay 3 cashier's checks. A separate small compartment held tightly bound stacks of $100 bills. I laid the documents out flat on the crate. I took a pen and a small notepad from my purse. I tallied the figures printed on the certificates, the bonds, the checks, and the physical cash. I calculated the final sum twice. The total amount came to exactly $850,000. I gathered the financial documents and set them aside. I gripped the wooden edges of the top tray and lifted it completely out of the box. The second layer contained a single item, a thick leather-bound diary. I opened the cover and flipped through the handwritten entries. A thin silk bookmark rested near the middle of the volume. I turned directly to that page. The ink was faded but clearly legible. The entry was dated exactly 55 years ago. I read the paragraphs line by line. My grandmother documented a cold evening walk near an industrial scrap metal junkyard on the outskirts of Philadelphia. She described hearing a faint noise searching through the sharp debris and finding an abandoned infant wrapped in a dirty blanket. She detailed the process of taking the baby to the authorities and completing the legal adoption paperwork. The abandoned infant she pulled from the freezing junkyard was my father. I closed the diary. I lifted the thin wooden divider separating the second and third layers. A crisp, white rectangular card rested in the center of the velvet lining. I picked it up and examined the printed text. It read, Attorney George Estate and Trust Law, Downtown Philadelphia. I placed the business card on top of the diary. I removed the velvet-lined tray, entirely exposing the deepest bottom compartment of the mahogany box. A thick manila envelope lay flat against the bare wood. I picked it up and turned it over. A heavy red wax seal secured the back flap. Written across the front of the envelope in my grandmother's steady handwriting was a single instruction: only open in the presence of an attorney. I did not break the red wax seal. I unzipped my large leather tote bag. I carefully placed the financial documents, the leather-bound diary, the business card, and the sealed envelope inside the bag. I closed the mahogany box, pushed it back into the vintage suitcase, and zipped the leather flaps shut. I walked out of the dilapidated storage house and secured the padlock on the heavy wooden door. I got back into my car, placed the tote bag on the passenger seat, and drove back toward the city. That same afternoon, I brought the sealed envelope and my personal documents to Attorney George's law office in downtown Philadelphia. I parked in the underground garage and took the elevator to the 14th floor. The receptionist directed me down a hallway into a spacious corner office. Attorney George sat behind a massive mahogany desk. He stood up, adjusted his suit jacket, and pointed to a leather chair directly across from him. I walked over, sat down, and placed my tote bag on the floor next to my feet. I reached inside the bag, retrieved the manila envelope with the red wax seal, and placed it flat in the exact center of his desk. Attorney George did not reach for the envelope right away. He opened a yellow notepad, picked up a silver pen, and looked directly at me. Before we proceed with opening any sealed documents, Bethany, I must formally verify your identity and confirm the passing of my client. Please provide your state-issued identification and the official original death certificate. I unzipped my tote bag, pulled out my Pennsylvania driver's license, and placed it on the desk. Next, I took out a hard plastic folder containing the certified death certificate I had secured from the county medical examiner earlier that morning. I handed the certificate across the desk. George picked up my license, checking the printed name and matching the photograph to my face. He then picked up the death certificate. Reading the raised seal and noting the exact date and time of my grandmother's passing, he stood up, walked over to a scanning machine resting on a side table, and copied both documents. He handed the originals back to me, sat back down in his chair, and finally picked up the sealed envelope. He opened his top drawer and took out a long, flat metal letter opener. He slid the sharp blade under the top flap of the envelope, slicing cleanly through the heavy red wax seal. The wax cracked into pieces, falling onto the desk. He pulled out a thick stack of folded legal papers. George then unlocked a filing cabinet located behind his desk. He pulled out a thick blue folder bearing my grandmother's full legal name, opened it, and placed the contents next to the papers from the envelope. He spent the next several minutes cross-referencing the pages, checking dates, and comparing notary stamps in complete silence. After verifying the paperwork, George pulled one specific document from the center of the pile. He turned it around and slid it across the polished wood toward me. "Read this carefully," he instructed. I picked up the heavy paper. The header identified it as a legally binding promissory note. I scanned the typed paragraphs. The document detailed a massive financial loan borrowed directly from my grandmother's retirement savings account. The terms specified a strict repayment schedule that had clearly been ignored. I looked at the exact figure printed in bold black ink: $250,000. I moved my eyes to the bottom of the page. Right above the date line, next to a blue notary stamp, I saw the distinct signatures of my father and my mother. They had signed as co-borrowers, legally committing themselves to repay the entire sum. I placed the promissory note back on the desk. George gathered the remaining papers and folded his hands over them. "Your grandmother contacted me directly shortly before she moved into your house," he said. "She recognized the financial manipulation and took immediate legal action to protect her remaining assets. The large mansion your parents currently occupy does not belong to them. Your grandmother held the exclusive title to the property." George tapped the stack of legal papers. "She instructed me to establish an irrevocable trust. She transferred the deed of the mansion entirely into this trust, naming you as the sole beneficiary." I watched him turn to the final page of the document. "Furthermore," George continued, keeping his tone strictly professional, "she executed a new will alongside the trust. This document contains a direct disinheritance clause. It legally strips your father of any and all inheritance rights. He receives absolutely nothing from the estate. However, he and your mother remain fully liable for the $250,000 they borrowed. The estate, which you now control, has the legal right to collect that debt in full." I nodded, understanding the complete legal reality of the situation. I gathered my copies of the documents, placed them into my bag, and zipped it closed. I stood up, shook Attorney George's hand, and walked out of the office. Leaving the law office of Attorney George III, walked out through the heavy glass double doors and stepped onto the busy downtown sidewalk. The winter air immediately hit my face. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders, crossed the street, and descended the concrete stairs into the underground parking garage. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across the gray pavement. I unlocked my car, climbed into the driver's seat, and closed the door, shutting out the echoing noise of the garage. I inserted the key into the ignition and turned it, letting the engine run to warm up the freezing interior. I reached into my purse, pulled out my cell phone, and placed it on the center console. I stared at the blank screen for a few seconds. I unlocked the device, opened my contact list, and tapped the number for my father. I pressed the speakerphone button, setting the volume to the highest level, and waited. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, the line clicked open. The sound of a television broadcasting a sports game played loudly in the background on his end. I could hear the faint sound of ice clinking against a glass. "What is it, Bethany?" my father answered. He did not say hello. His voice carried a sharp edge of irritation, as if I had interrupted something highly important. "Grandma passed away," I stated clearly, keeping my voice entirely flat. I did not offer any additional details about the timeline or the circumstances of the winter storm. My father exhaled loudly into the receiver. The sound was a heavy, drawn-out sigh of inconvenience. "All right. Look, I have a very busy schedule this week with the firm," he said. The television volume in the background increased slightly. "I do not have the time to drive all the way out there to deal with paperwork. Just call a local funeral home. Let them handle the extraction and the basic arrangements. Put the charges on a credit card and send me the final bill later. I will reimburse you for the standard costs." He paused for a fraction of a second. "Is that all?" he asked clearly, preparing to end the call and return to his game. "No, that is not all," I replied quickly, stopping him before he could disconnect. I leaned back against the driver's seat and looked straight at the dashboard. I received a formal notification from her legal representative, Attorney George. The television in the background suddenly went silent. My father stopped moving. "A lawyer? Why is a lawyer involved?" "Attorney George requires all legal heirs to be physically present at the funeral service," I explained, maintaining a steady, measured pace in my delivery. He informed me that he must officially read the final will and testament in front of the family. He mentioned the distribution of a very large, previously undisclosed financial estate. He refuses to process the asset transfer unless you are there. Total silence filled the line. For several long seconds, the only sound was the low hum of my car engine and the heater blowing warm air through the vents. When my father finally spoke again, his tone had shifted completely. The sharp irritation vanished, replaced by a smooth, accommodating warmth. He cleared his throat. "Well," my father said, lowering his voice into a solemn register, "as her only son, it is my absolute duty to oversee her final farewell. We cannot simply leave this to strangers at a basic funeral home. She deserves a proper tribute." "You want to organize it?" I asked. "Of course I will organize it," he insisted rapidly, the pace of his words accelerating. "I will contact the director at St. Jude's Cathedral right now. We will book the main hall for the service and the reception area for the reading of the will. We need high-end catering, premium floral arrangements, the works." I heard a muffled rustling sound over the speakerphone as he moved through his house. "Betty!" my father shouted in the background, directing his voice away from the receiver toward my mother. "Betty, come here. Bring your phone. We need to contact the entire Gold Club guest list immediately." "For what?" my mother's voice faintly echoed from another room. "Tell them we are hosting a major memorial service this weekend," my father yelled back. "Tell everyone to wear their best suits. The lawyer is coming to divide a massive estate." He brought the phone back to his mouth. "Bethany, do not worry about a single expense. I will handle all the prestigious details. Just make sure the lawyer knows the exact time and location of the reception." "I will tell him," I said. "Good," my father replied, his breathing slightly elevated with anticipation. "We will see you there." I did not say goodbye. I tapped the red button on the screen and disconnected the call. I picked up my phone, dropped it into the passenger seat, shifted the car into drive, and pulled out of the parking space. The morning of the funeral, the main hall of St. Jude's Cathedral was packed with guests wearing elegant black attire from my parents' country club. The wooden pews were completely full by 10 o'clock. My father and my mother sat together in the very first row, holding high-end tissue papers and nodding respectfully to their wealthy friends. Attorney George walked up the carpeted steps to the wooden podium. He adjusted the microphone stand, snapped open the brass locks on his leather briefcase, and pulled out the thick legal trust document. The low murmurs in the hall stopped immediately. I am here today to officially execute the final will and irrevocable trust of Virginia, Attorney George stated. His voice echoed loudly through the overhead speakers. He looked directly down at the front row. According to the strict legal directives established before her passing the title of the primary residence, the mansion transfers immediately and exclusively to her granddaughter Bethany. The previous occupants hold no legal claim to the property. My father stood up so quickly that his wooden chair scraped loudly against the polished marble floor. He pointed an aggressive finger at the podium. "That is completely invalid," my father shouted. He turned his head to look at his country club friends for support. "I am her only biological son. I am the direct blood heir. You cannot legally bypass a biological son for a grandchild. I will take this to civil court and challenge the paperwork tomorrow morning." Attorney George did not flinch or raise his voice. He calmly reached back into his leather briefcase and pulled out a separate sheet of paper. He held it up for the entire room to see. "Before you attempt to discuss inheritance rights," Attorney George replied, "we must address the outstanding liabilities of the estate. I hold a signed promissory note right here. You and your wife borrowed exactly $250,000 from her private retirement account. The estate is officially calling in the debt today. You are required to repay this exact amount immediately." My father crossed his arms tightly over his chest. He let out a loud, scoffing laugh. "I am not paying a single dollar back," he argued, projecting his voice to the back doors of the cathedral. "Children have no obligation to pay off their mother's debts. It was family money. It belongs to me anyway." I stepped out from the side aisle and walked slowly toward the center of the altar. I stopped right next to the podium, standing shoulder to shoulder with the lawyer. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the certified certificate of adoption, and unfolded the fragile paper. "You are not her biological son," I said. My voice projected clearly through the microphone, cutting through his argument. "You have no blood claim to anything in this room." My father froze mid-sentence. His arms dropped heavily to his sides. I looked down at the document and read the official text aloud to the silent crowd. 55 years ago, she found an abandoned infant inside a scrap metal junkyard on the edge of the city. She brought that infant home and signed these exact adoption papers. I held the certificate up high in the air. "You were a stranger she chose to save." A wave of low whispers swept through the wooden pews. The elite guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, staring directly at my father. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His face lost all its color. I turned my head and looked directly at my mother. She was sinking lower into her front row seat, trying to avoid eye contact. I stepped closer to the edge of the altar. "A few months ago, you threw a party to celebrate," I said, keeping my tone completely even. "I watched it live through the security camera I installed in your living room. I heard every single word." I locked eyes with my father. "You raised your glass of red wine." I continued reciting the exact phrase etched into my memory. "To a much-needed change of pace. No one has to revolve around a medical care schedule anymore." I turned my gaze back to my mother. "And you told your friends?" Bethany volunteered for the hard part. The cathedral fell into a dead silence. The country club guests actively leaned away from my parents, creating a physical gap in the pews. Several people shook their heads in disgust. My father stared blindly at the marble floor, his hands trembling visibly at his sides. My mother covered her entire face with her designer purse. I folded the adoption certificate, put it securely back into my pocket, and walked down the side aisle, leaving them standing entirely alone in front of the humiliated crowd. Several weeks after the funeral service concluded, the county probate court finally issued its official and final legal ruling regarding the estate. Attorney George contacted me early Tuesday morning confirming that all probate hurdles had been successfully cleared. Armed with the court's official writ of possession, local law enforcement authorities moved swiftly. 2 county sheriff deputies drove their cruiser directly to the gated driveway of the suburban mansion. They stepped out of their vehicle, walked up to the front door, and served formal eviction notices to my father and my mother. The deputies supervised the process while my parents scrambled to pack their personal belongings into a few cardboard boxes under strict time constraints. They were legally required to vacate the premises within hours. Simultaneously, Attorney George filed formal execution motions with the financial institutions holding my parents' personal bank accounts. Because they defaulted entirely on the promissory note, the court granted an immediate asset freeze and garnishment order. Their primary checking accounts, corporate construction funds, and secondary savings portfolios were locked down by federal order to satisfy the $250,000 debt owed to the estate. Every single asset they accumulated through financial manipulation was systematically seized and redirected into the probate account. While the legal enforcement procedures were actively unfolding, my cell phone rang while I was sitting at my office desk. I looked at the incoming caller ID. It displayed my father's private number. I swiped the screen to accept the connection and placed the phone flat against the desk surface on speaker mode. Bethany. My father's voice broke through the speaker. He sounded entirely defeated. The confident arrogance from the cathedral had completely vanished. Please, you have to talk to the lawyer. The police just threw us out of the house. They locked all of our bank accounts. We have nowhere to go. Please help us out, my daughter. We are your family. I did not raise my voice. I did not display any anger. I leaned back in my office chair, kept my hands resting flat on the wooden desk, and answered him with absolute finality. You are not a member of my family, I stated. I reached out my right hand, tapped the red end call button on the screen, disconnecting his voice permanently. Without waiting for a second call attempt, I opened my phone settings, selected his contact file, and tapped the block button. I repeated the exact same process for my mother's phone number. From that exact second onward, their digital connection to my life was severed forever. With the legal title of the mansion securely transferred and the financial liabilities fully recovered, I returned to Attorney George's office to finalize the remaining administrative responsibilities. I reviewed and signed the official estate tax documents, ensuring every federal and state obligation associated with the inheritance was completely settled with the Internal Revenue Service. Following my grandmother's personal values regarding the protection of vulnerable seniors, I directed the remaining financial funds toward a certified charitable organization in Philadelphia. I met with the executive director of a well-established regional foundation dedicated to supporting elderly citizens without family support. I signed the official legal transfer agreements, dedicating the entire sum of $850,000 from the mahogany box toward the construction and operational funding of a brand new residential care facility. The foundation formally named the new wing after my grandmother, honoring her legacy of quiet resilience and enduring strength. I stepped out of the foundation's downtown headquarters late in the afternoon. The winter sun was setting behind the city skyline, casting a warm golden light across the paved sidewalks of Philadelphia. I took a deep breath of the crisp air, walked toward my car, and drove away into a quiet, independent future.